how you can get better results, how you can move forward, and how you can actually start to love yourself in a different way. It's Matt Tait here from Fork in the Road, your channel for transformation. Once again, I'm going through this book by Andreas, Transforming Yourself. And at the moment, I'm in the chapter 7, which is all about mistakes. How do we handle the mistakes inside of ourselves so that they don't turn into these incredible identity patterns, these qualities that are negative, that I'm just no good at this, when actually it was just a mistake and we've internalized it. So we're managing our mistakes so that they serve us and they strengthen good qualities instead of bad ones. In the last video, I was looking at just exploring where your mistakes live inside your nervous system. So when you close your eyes and you think, okay, I've got this quality of, I think I used the example of me being responsible, which I am. I'm a responsible person. And yet, I've had times in my life when I've not been responsible. And so, eating, I've been irresponsibly eating at times. So, not such a great example. But I think my brain had categorized it somewhere else. But it's good to bring it in just to use as a bit of motivation when I find myself irresponsibly eating for more than one meal. I don't mind having a good time, but I don't want to do it 7 days a week because my body will get bigger. And being on that weight loss journey of just managing my weight and getting a different standard for myself. And so, now I've got this example of me. I definitely am a responsible person, but I was irresponsibly eating. So I'm looking at how I can play with that in such a way that it can serve me better. So I can be aware of it and not be unconscious about it and have it pop up in my unconscious mind as, oh, warning, let's sort this out. You've eaten terrible food for 3 days straight. Let's get ourselves sorted before it becomes 3 months straight, right? So that's a way of it serving me. And so think about yourself. What's a quality inside yourself, your identity, who you are? I am this, I am that. And then where have you had a counterexample, a mistake, where it's not been exactly right? And so now I'm going to exercise number 2. It's actually chapter 8. It's 8.2. And 8.2 in transforming mistakes is adjusting the scope and the quality. And so I think about adjusting scope and quality. What do we mean by that? And so when I jump into the scope and the quality, we have an activity. And the activity is based on these 3 elements. Where are we? Here we go. We have narrowing the scope, number 1. Narrowing the scope, widening the scope, and number 3 is integrating the scope. Apologies for the loud sounding vehicle at the side there. Integrating the scope. So we've got narrowing, widening, and integrating the scope. What do we mean? Well, it's really useful. Here's the activity. So think about the time when you had a counter example. So for me, it would be those times when I've eaten irresponsibly. And in this situation, I'm reading it from the book now, he says, we want to examine the counterexamples, right? So you've got your quality, who is who you are, and you've got the counterexamples. And we want to change the scope and quality you have been using. And so start by grouping the counterexamples, being cautious not to do too many at once, since that can sometimes be overwhelming and unpleasant, right? So that's what's in the book. After grouping these counterexamples, examine them to find out what they have in common. When they are grouped, you often can immediately find that they are somehow similar, or they have similarities, or it just pops out without any effort. Okay, so let's just have a look at that. So for me, I've had that counterexample of not being responsible in perhaps my eating. All right, not being responsible with my eating. And so if I stop and put them into groups, well, there's groups when you're going down the highway, you're hungry and you've not prepared any food, right? So perhaps not prepared, or not having fueled myself before a long trip, or having thought about it, right? So maybe lack of planning, right? So that's almost a different category, but we need a little bit of that in my being responsible, because planning is being responsible, right? So that's one little cluster. We have another little group over here somewhere. Notice I'm pointing over here. My brain's just said, that's over there, and that's socializing. So I've had a couple of examples in my last 2 weeks of reducing my food intake, where I've had 2 social situations where I've had a little bit of some naughty food, right? And that was fun. I didn't mind that. That was a counterexample in that situation, but it was a social situation, and in, you know, balance kind of elements, that's not too bad. But if it's all the time, once again, it becomes a problem. So you need to have a plan for that social situation, and it's good to have the social. So that's a counterexample of me being responsible with food, but that's okay, because we're going to find out in a moment how we can put it into a different scope. And so I've got traveling down the highway, going through fast food, because there's no other options, and I'm starving. There's social situations. What's another situation where I've eaten? I guess you might find yourself at a restaurant where there's not many options, and maybe someone else has led you there, maybe your partner wants to go to a restaurant, and you just go along, oh yeah, cool, I'll go check it out, and you look at it, and it's all, you know, fatty food, or it's all, whatever it might be, right? There might be something going on there, and you're hunting for an option, you don't have one. Now, if this happens in a blue moon, well, it's once in a blue moon, it's just an adventure, just roll with it, and then we'll get back to being responsible. So it's good to have that counterexample sitting there as just a bit of a warning. Go have some fun, don't beat yourself up, get back on the horse tomorrow with your fitness goals, right? And so, but then there's another category to it again. So there's, yeah, you've gone into a restaurant, but then there's the restaurants you go to on a regular basis, where it's not just a one-off random, and it's actually something you could plan for. Well, if you know you're going to that restaurant, then really explore the menu to find things that you can have, where you're not starving, and make a quick decision, right? Not rushed. So the word rushed is coming into it, where you can just be more prepared because you know you're going there. So rushed could be a category where you're rushed, and another one because you're starving. That probably goes over here, back into that other camp of driving down the highway. So you see how I'm breaking down my counter examples of not being responsible with food. So we can start to break it down and not just beat ourselves up generally for all these things, and say, well, no, I can actually do something about some of those situations. And some of those situations I'm going to let fly because it's once a month. You know, that's okay. We're going to have some fun in life. And so there's another category, fun, right? So now let's go back to the book and let's have a look at what's in here with this little thing. So I've just now grouped them in my brain, my counterexample of responsibility. So after examine and find out what they have in common, well, I've just discussed that. When they are grouped, often you can immediately see they're similar. So I just made that part up on the fly. I saw, oh wow, actually, yeah, there are different situations, and there's probably more, right? Really useful for them pulling it apart and coming up with a battle plan to minimize the damage on those times when you're going to have some fun eating, some fun stuff, right? It's just going to happen, right? The next part, he says, then experiment with redefining this aspect of yourself by narrowing or widening the scope in space or time or both, or by thinking of a larger overarching category, which I kind of just did, that integrates the two. And the word he uses in the book is balance, right? Sometimes you're motivated and sometimes you're lazy, but it's called balance. You've got to find your balance. We can't be motivated every second of the day or we'll fall apart because we'll be exhausted. And we can't be lazy every part of the day because we'll never move forward on anything. So really interesting how it's categorizing. And so the next part he talks about is if you find that some counterexamples are actually examples of a different quality that is more important to you, you can separate those and put them into that appropriate category. Do as much as you can on your own and assisting each other because he's got groups going on. So I think that is just incredible. So when we're going into helping you with understand this, let's narrow the scope. So you notice how I've said with myself, talking about situations where, well, okay, I'm going down the highway, I've got no food, I'm going to go to McDonald's or I'm going to go to some fast food because, look, the situation has just evolved and I could never have been prepared. It's been sprung on me, right? Now, if that happens once in a blue moon, you can put that in its own category. Say, okay, look, that was a one-off. You didn't know it was happening. Now it's happened. You're hungry. You just deal with sorting yourself out and you'll get back on the horse on your food routines tomorrow, tonight. You'll drink lots of water. You'll do something. We're all good. And so you can see how I've narrowed the scope to say, okay, that's a bit of a left field situation. And notice how I'm putting over here. That was a situation. I've decided to let that part go and be all right with that. So narrowing the scope. Now, for some people, their standards are very high with food and responsibility in food. So therefore, that's not good enough for them. I can't have that, right? So that's up to you. So that's narrowing the scope. So now you're letting yourself off the hook there, sure. But if you get back on the horse, that's okay too. So I haven't necessarily destroyed the quality. The next one was widening the scope, right? So sometimes you have to widen it up. And that's where he talks about balance, motivation versus laziness. Well, we can't be lazy all the time. We can't be motivated all the time. There's a balance. That could be an overarching one. So for me, balance might actually serve me in that conversation. So, all right, well, we're going to have a balance. What can I do to balance out the moment where I've had the terrible food? Once again, I'm over here with my hand in physical space. Notice where I'm putting it? Over there. Somewhere over there is where not necessarily fully in my control, right? But can I grab a counterexample and put it into my database to think about how I might control it afterwards? Right, so the whole point, I can say, well, now that's starting to serve me. Now I'm seeing, now I can have the word control. I'm widening it. So, right, I'm allowed to have that thing and narrowing it, but then I can widen it and so I can still be responsible for the whole system by controlling what I do afterwards, by shifting my habit afterwards and not just continuing to have 5 meals of fast food in a row. I was going down the highway. I was 3 hours drive from home. I needed food. Because, and here is another thing, I wanted to be responsible driving on the road. I might have been getting snoozy and sleepy, and safety was more important, right? Not going off the road was more important. Keeping me and my partner Anna safe on the road and the other people around me was important. Getting home safely was important. And so I've been responsible for our safety instead of being responsible only for my eating by not eating the rubbish when I haven't got anything around me. Of course, if I'm doing that same trip next time, I can be responsible by getting some more water in the car, some healthier snacks in the car, some things I know that fuel up my energy, right? Sometimes I'll put some snacks in the car, but they don't fuel my energy. So I need one that fuels my energy. So you see how I'm widening the scope here? I'm allowing an overarching philosophy to say, I'm going to allow that to keep safe, because otherwise I'll get snoozy and, be everywhere on the road. So widening the scope. And so when you widen the scope to include yourself, many examples of being kind was the word he was using, to others become examples of being kind to yourself. So sometimes you've got to be, like in that example, being angry about someone, you're being kind to yourself because you're protecting yourself, right? So you're still being kind. So for me, I was being responsible by having the McDonald's. Now, you got to be careful. It's not a get out of jail card, but I was going to drop my energy and get off the road. So a really good one. And the last one was integrating your scope. So I love integrating scope. If you examine the group of counterexamples along with the examples, you might find them both as examples of a larger and more important quality, which is kind of what I did with the safety was a more important quality. Safety versus being responsible with my food. But I was also being responsible for getting home safely. So you can see how it can serve you, it can help you navigate these mistakes in a variety of ways. And you can actually find some healthy ways to still get them. So I hope that helps you in adjusting the scope of your quality. And the book, they start talking about all of the things they experienced and working our way through it. We have then, I'm just noticing the next section talks about guilt and regret and dealing with that. And so we might deal with that one. And spending some time when we'll have a look at that. Where something's harmed someone else. So in this situation, I'm talking about only myself and making sure others are safe, right? So that's about being responsible. That's my example. What's your quality? What's the quality that you're using? What's the quality that is something you know inside yourself and you've had counter examples? I use the example of responsibility and irresponsibly eating, right? And then finding ways of exploring this to come up with strategies to being aware so I can do something different next time, right? It's really useful. And then once that becomes automatic, I always grab that particular snack and put it in the car, and I know it will get my energy up for another hour. Perfect, right? And not necessarily just sugary stuff. Maybe it's, nuts or, I don't know, other things. So whatever it is, that is a great example of using the scope. Using scope and widening it, integrating it, and narrowing the scope. And playing around with getting a better result for yourself. I hope that helps. This is all about Steve Andreas' book, Transforming Yourself, Becoming Who You Want to Be, and mastering your system by playing around with where you're storing stuff inside and how you can get better results, how you can move forward, and how you can actually start to love yourself in a different way. Matt Tait, Fork in the Road. As always, be sure to click on the subscribe button, because that means you get my videos on a regular basis. Click on the bell so you know the videos are popping up when I deliver them. Alright, I'll see you guys next time, and enjoy the rest of your day by integrating the scope, by widening it, by narrowing it, and by integrating those scopes and those categories so that you find better ways to handle it. Talk to you next time.